Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the AIIA this evening to celebrate the launch of Mohammad Chowdhury's book, Border Crossings. We are very excited by the turnout tonight, and I hope everyone is excited for what is sure to be a brilliant event. Tonight, we will have the pleasure of joining Mohammad, as well as the Honourable Jaala Pulford, in discussion about his personal journey that transcends borders, both literal and figurative. I have worked with Mohammad for the past month or so here at the AIIA as an intern. Having read his book and heard his stories, it is clear that his life experiences are very much unique. And yet, his novel truly speaks to the experiences of every person who at some point has felt like an outsider. On behalf of the AIIA, I would like to thank Mohammad for his contributions towards the Institute and for hosting his event here tonight. Mohammad's memoir resonates deeply with the AIIA as an organization that aims to facilitate discussions on matters that span borders. In his book, Mohammad encourages us to embrace the complexities of global society and find common ground amidst diversity, a message that the AIIA strongly promotes. We are also very privileged to have the Honourable Jaala Pulford here with us tonight to join Mohammad in discussion about his memoir. I would like to express our excitement and gratitude at having Jaala here and thank her for her support with this event. Before we welcome Mohammad and Jaala, I would like to please invite Richard Young forward to present the Welcome to Country. Richard is an esteemed artist and valued member of Victoria's Indigenous community, and we are so grateful that he could be here with us this evening. Please join with me in welcoming Richard.
I'm bad with names. I was going to say Kate, but it's Kat. Thank you, Kat. What do I say? Firstly, I just want to acknowledge that this is Wurundjeri country of the Woiwurrung from the Kulin Nation. My ancestry covers this state, Tasmania. My wife, she Radri from NewSouth. I don't do welcome because I'm not from this land, but been thinking long and hard about how do I acknowledge a brother and I had to think of the words who I was instantly attracted to over a Zoom during COVID, and I know he's already taken. And I got to hear that love story at a recent family event. Thank you, Rahana. And to acknowledge one's country is an important thing, and we're all Australian. You know, I acknowledge everyone in the room because one of the things we talk about is everyone's story matters. And as I got to know Mohammad and those that have read his book, we'll have some insights into his story and just the significance on how his story matters. And a lot of people talk about history. You know, there's a lot of debates about the history of this country and from whose perspective that the history's been written. And if you know the individual, Brother Mohammad, people who don't know him will have a perception of what he's written. I've been blessed to have, how long now, brother? A couple of years, been to their house and been blessed by his cooking and his little YouTube channel with his sons. Followed their journey, and those that know this know. But as an Aboriginal man who grew up in Broadmeadows, who barracks for Collingwood, and yes, Eddie Maguire is a very close friend of mine, and a lot of people still don't know his story either. I'm glad that your story hasn't stopped and it will continue, and I'm really keen to hear more of the stories of your journey, brother, here in Australia. But what Mohammad means to me and my family, he's a man that's gracious. He's a man that's taught us a lot of things. He opens up his heart, his home to us, and he's allowed us to spend time with his wife and children. And all I know is that to acknowledge country and how significant and spiritual that is, to acknowledge a man of his faith and his journey and what he's been through, but to humbly share in such a personal way where people may not even believe his stories. He is a man of measure. He's a man of a time. There's such a pointed time as this for people to stand up and speak. And for me to do an acknowledgement of country without acknowledging my dear friend wouldn't be justice enough for this land to receive him, his spirit, his intention, his atmosphere, the vibrations that he brings into a land which is sometimes quite ignorant about the journey of others. So I don't just acknowledge that this is Wurundjeri country, I acknowledge tonight that this is Mohammad's place for him to come and share his narrative, his story, his heart, for his story does matter. And I love you, brother, and I look forward to the interaction, and I'm looking forward to the signing so I can get a photo and take it home to the kids. But thanks, Kat, and thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you so much, Richard. It is my pleasure to now welcome Mohammed and the Honourable Jaala Pulford forward to begin the event. Thank you.
Okay, hello. My husband just said to me, gee, Rich is going to be a hard act to follow. Thank you. Thank you. It's very nice to see you again. Had the pleasure of hearing Richard convince a bunch of, highly capable, shiny, beautiful 30-something professionals to learn more and to understand more about the journey that Australia is on, particularly in the lead up to the referendum in the next couple of months, and an amazing community leader. So it's lovely to see you again. Thank you. I have to lean back. Welcome.
Thank you, John.
Our author.
Thank you.
And welcome to the online people too. We have to look there
Hello.
occasionally
Hi.
as well as here. Okay, so I have this book. You're all going to have it when you leave. Would you sign it for me?
I'm signing for you. I'll sign for you right
Thank
now.
you.
Yeah.
While you're doing that, we're going to try and make this a little interactive, aren't we?
Totally.
Yes.
Totally.
So I'm going to warm everybody up just a tiny bit. Who's written a book? Hands up. A few, yeah, half a dozen or so people. Who's thought, I'm going to write a book one day? Yeah, heaps more of you. Yes, I thought so. So, Mohammed,
Yeah.
you wrote a book and it's fabulous. And we're
Thank
going to talk about it. How do you transition from, I'm going to write a book to actually writing a book? How did that, have there been some of these stories and experiences that you describe? Do they just bounce around your head and your heart and your soul for years, some of them for months, others?
Yeah, I didn't even decide to write a book, Jaala. So I was in my mid-30s, probably about 15, 17 years ago. And I'd started to learn Arabic. So, I was born in the UK, grew up in London, family from Bangladesh, brought up as an observant Muslim. And as many of you know, basically, Muslims, recite prayers usually in Arabic language. So I'd learned a lot of those prayers off by heart when I was a kid. But I never understood the language. Flash forward to my mid-30s, and I was working a lot in the Middle East. I was looking at it on the map right now. I was working, you can always find where you are in the world in this room. So, I was working a lot in the Middle East and listening to lots of Arabic in meetings. And I sort of thought, I was going to go and learn this language. So I started learning language. And a year and a half later, a bit like what you're suggesting, I'm a bit intense with stuff. So I was quite fluent in Arabic within about a year and a half. And I started traveling a lot to Damascus and Jordan and Lebanon and doing travel writing. No ideas to write a book at this stage, just doing travel writing for fun. Put all my writing together and sent it to this famous journalist in London called Robert Fisk. Used to write for the Independent newspaper, and he amazingly wrote back to me, sort of saying, "Oh, I read your stuff and I like it, but you got all these things wrong about Lebanon." So he wrote me a whole list of stuff I didn't get right about Lebanon. And then he met me, and when he met me, he said, "You've written about Damascus, but you're not Mark Twain, who lived in Damascus." He said, "You know, you're not Mark Twain." I said,
Most of us
"No
aren't.
problem.
Yeah.
We're not. No
I'll
problem,
take
sir."
that personally.
Yeah, the fact that I'm mentioned in the same sentence was fine, but he said, "But you've got something that Mark Twain didn't have and that I don't have, which is that because you speak a few languages and probably because you're brown skinned, people just somehow trust you and let you in. So when you go and see them, they let you into their homes, they talk to you in a more unguarded way than they would if they talked to me or to Mark Twain." So he said, "That's something which you need to exploit in your writing." So he sort of left me with that thought, Jaala, and then I sort of thought, I need to write a book. So that's really what took me there, if you like. So then it was like, there's travel writing in here, but it's mixed with thinking about my childhood and all that. So I was thinking about what he said, and I sort of said, well, how come I can connect with people culturally? And I kept on thinking about it a lot, and I'm going back to childhood, growing up in, mid 70s, late 70s London. We had to deal with a lot of racism and stuff like that, and we're a bit on the outside, quite a bit on the outside, and not just racially, but also economically, migrant and all that sort of thing. So I think being on the outside made me work a bit harder to get accepted. Made me slightly better at communicating, maybe, meant I worked a bit harder at school. And I think that by being on the outside and having to try and make up for being on the outside, I think it sort of gave me a bit of a superpower of some sort. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah, and I think you've harnessed that in a very special way. And I have these really conflicting emotions about how I want to try and describe this a little bit too, without spoiling what it is you're all going to read. But it, Kat, in her opening remarks and welcoming us just before, talked about this being an entirely unique story and experience, and it is, because each person's story and experience is unique. But there are elements of this story that will be powerful reminders of really challenging experiences for anyone who has grown up in a culture that they are not that they are not a part of the dominant culture, and indeed for anyone first generation or second generation, or people who have packed up everything they have and moved halfway around the world. A lot of this will be powerfully resonant. And one of the things that was really striking to me, and there are a couple of times I had to put, this, like there are beautiful, heartwarming parts to your story, and there are some that are like a bit funny, really sort of make you laugh, and then there are bits, there are parts, and the way that you share experience, that some that I found so upsetting, I need to put this down for a bit. Some that made me angry, and some that almost made me feel physically ill. And I'm not trying to deter you. It's an uplifting and beautiful, powerful story. But there are moments that are captured and think, oh my goodness, is this how so many people in our society experience being, newer, or being, being different to, say, two-thirds or three-quarters or 98% of the other kids in the class, for instance. And, like I have an unusual first name. My maiden name was McDonald, very not unusual. But, and I can do a bit of a suntan by the end of summer, and my name's actually Aboriginal. And so growing up always, there's always this story about where you're from. It's like, I'm from Castlemaine. No, but like, where are you from? It's like, no, like, really, that's where I'm from.
Yeah.
And I just, and so this is like with like so many generations back, no one can really remember kind of Anglo-Celtic 4th and 5th generation Australian kind of experience. And even still, people have this kind of amazing urge to put all of us in these little categories to understand how to relate to us. And so, I don't know, I wonder if you could share some of your more, or perhaps if you could share with us an example of this. You spent a lot of time in airports, I think there's a story perhaps you could share that is a very extreme example of what are you here, where are you really from, and what are you really up to from an airport that I think sets the tone really powerfully.
Let's try that. So, Heathrow Airport, London. Good morning, sir. Could you step aside, please? I would like to ask you a few questions. Sure, I reply, rubbing the tiredness out of my eyes, putting up no resistance to the familiar drill. My questioner is evidently a government official undertaking extra surveillance following yesterday's terrorist alerts. I found out about the elevated security at London's airports on BBC News before boarding the crowded British Airways flight 14 hours ago. Where are you arriving from today, sir? Dhaka, Bangladesh, I add, thinking that the sun must be setting there about now. And what were you doing in Bangladesh, sir? He says with a monotonous drone, leafing through my passport at the same time. I was there on holiday, visiting relatives. I look over the thin-framed, wispy-haired officer as he begins to examine my documents. His drab suit matches the grey, speckled carpet of Terminal 4's arrivals hall. Passengers silently weave through orderly queues, some speaking in muffled voices and others looking subdued from jet lag, a total contrast to the cacophony of loudspeaker announcements and disorganization of Dhaka Airport, where Heathrow's carpets snuffle out noise, the gritty wheels of roller bags and lopsided trolleys click-clack across Dhaka Airport's cracked-up tiles. Back in the first world silence of the UK, I am missing the homely untidiness of Bangladesh, the vibrant colours, the humid smells, and the incessant raising of voices. From his tired attire, I cannot determine whether the officer is from the Metropolitan Police or British intelligence. He has a kind, bedraggled-looking and spotty face. The thinning hair on his head is longer at the sides than on top. The blemishes on the maroon cover of my British passport include a crease that runs all the way down it, like a whitewater spring descending a craggy alpine mountain. The officer turns the pages with care, separating the leaves with meticulously shaped fingernails. His professionalism and duty to care momentarily cushion me from the cold reality of my travel experiences today, littered as they are with an incessant amount of scrutiny and suspicion over who I am and why I'm traveling. He too asks me about my reasons for traveling so much, about my family origins, and in particular, about my frequent visits to the Middle East. I work for an international consulting firm and I'm involved in a number of assignments around the world, so I have to fly around frequently. Plus, I travel a lot personally too, especially to the Middle East and Asia. What about the trips to Syria, sir, and to Lebanon and Jordan? Were these for business also? As he poses the question, I catch him noticing the gold British Airways frequent flyer identification tag dangling from the strap of my knapsack. He cannot tell that I went to the West Bank last year, since at the conclusion of a 9-hour ordeal at the border crossing, I'd requested the Israeli authorities not to put a stamp in my passport, but to do so on a blank sheet of paper instead. Whilst his questioning is thorough, it is nowhere near as forensic as the Israelis, whose methods are purposeful and meticulous, full of mind games. I don't mention the West Bank trip. Mostly those were holiday trips. One trip to Jordan was for business. I wince at the memory of that awful meeting in Amman some months ago when the executive we were negotiating with walked out of a heated session. Do you have any particular reason for spending so much time in the Middle East? I'm learning Arabic, and I'd like to go to the region to practice. And I go to Saudi Arabia from time to time to perform the Muslim pilgrimage at Makkah. I feel a desire to get this questioning over with and to get out of Heathrow and make my way to London. Where were your parents born? The officer asks. My parents? I repeat back, looking at the officer but mumbling the words under my breath. Since childhood, I've been forced to deal with such inquiries, a necessary evil these days for many Muslims who travel a lot, their privilege of anonymity in travel temporarily withdrawn. But as time has gone on, I've developed my techniques to a point where I can confidently challenge when needed. You don't really need to know where my parents were born, do you? I reply, nodding my head gently in the direction of my passport, the Queen's coat of arms showing proudly on its cover. I'm employing the same tactic I used successfully when stopped in Milan's Linate airport a few weeks ago. But that was with a smiling and casual Italian immigration officer who looked like he just wanted to practice his English. Today, I fear I've made an error of judgment by challenging this man, barely a few weeks after the 7/7 terrorist attacks in London. The officer looks back at me, speechless. And as the seconds tick by, I wonder what will happen now.
Yes, you'll never go through an airport or land-based security check again after this book with the same cavalier regard. I mean, it's always a bit of a tense moment, but there are, you know, I think I have a new way. I certainly will have a new way of contemplating this.
It's one of those moments where you're not really in control. You know, you basically have no real bargaining power in those situations. And I tend to accept that, and therefore you might be thinking, don't you, do I ever get, you know, angry about these border crossings? Do I ever get, you know, upset about them? I tend to remain as calm as possible, and I tend to do a bit of negotiating, but I tend not to lose it, if you like.
And not to get too emotionally engaged in the indignities that are being inflicted. Now, that accent, that's very British.
It changes every day. So if I get into an Uber with an Uber driver from East Africa, I can guarantee that my accent will just automatically become an East African English accent. I'm sure lots of you have experienced this, right? It just changes.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? You know, in Australia, you can pick the people from Adelaide, but for folks from the UK, you can pick the street almost, can't you?
So when I'm speaking to my team in Bangladesh, I'm sounding like this. Seriously.
And the hand starts flying.
The hand starts flying. I was in Brisbane. I was in Brisbane once, 7, 8 years ago. We used to live in India in those days. I was in Brisbane visiting my in-laws, and I was in the office. It was an open plan office. And I had to have a conference call with my team in Mumbai. And you'll relate to this, Chris. So I was basically shouting at them on the phone, and ye to nahi hoga, na ye nahi hoga, yeah, nahi hoga. I'm just speaking in Hindi, English, mixed, shouting. And of course, you know, Australia people are quite courteous and quiet in the office, you know. So I put the phone down, and people are just looking at me like this. And I'm saying, team meeting. So
nothing to look at here. Oh, fabulous.
Yeah.
Now, your parents made a very big decision to make a very big move, and then embarked on all manner of different types of work and business, entrepreneurship, and your own hard work and intellect combined with their passion about opportunities for their children, and perhaps that little X factor of here I am, I'm going to just do all that I can. You found yourself at Oxford University studying PPE and then a master's at Cambridge. You know, exceptional education experiences and opportunities of which you should be. I have no doubt you are both very proud, but also very thankful. You know, that which doesn't kill us makes us stronger and all that. But one of the things that that I'm sure has served you well professionally, and that's how we met. There's a backstory, but that's not for tonight. But but one of the things that that your life education, your formal education, your professional life, and really comes through really powerfully in the story of your life to date, is your skepticism and your desire to question things. Yes. And when you live in two cultures, there's all manner of different things to question. And you know, what I loved was the way that you describe your. I'm trying to describe how you would describe it. I'm not sure I'll do it justice, but that, you know, the experience of a young man deciding to not take one path or the other, but to take a different path, a new path. And I actually had lunch with somebody today and was talking about this very thing, because he had described a similar life experience of, you know, with each generation, the cultural ties to the place of origin, they become more distant, but they become deeper and stronger simultaneously. It was a really interesting way he described it. But there is a part of the book that I thought maybe, or we thought would be great to share about challenging an expectation about interacting with older family members, more senior family members, and how you created a bit of a stir.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I'll read a couple of pages from here. You're right. I think I was a bit of a rebel, and let me read first, and then I'll say something. So, this is from a trip to Bangladesh. I'm aged about 15. I harbored doubts about salam. Salam means, in this context, means the culture of touching the feet of elders when you meet them, which is a culture in Bengal cultural tradition. I harbored doubts about salam. As soon as I learned from Maulvi Sahib was like our Quran teacher in London. As soon as I learned from Maulvi Sahib that in Islam, any form of submission to another human being was forbidden, the only question that remained about rebellion was when, not if. Only Allah should be revered in such a way, Maulvi Sahib would smile to us in the living room of our house in Grove Park Road. It is not right for us to lower our heads in front of anyone else. Maulvi Sahib was right, but I also understood that touching feet did not mean one was literally treating the other as a deity. Islam is so much about the intention and the principle, yet Muslim practice is so much about the practical and the literal. Finding compatibility between these two is an age-old test of life, whether it be for shortening prayers, performing salam, or all sorts of other activities. There are many ways in which we lower our heads to others in forms of deference, not condoned by Islam. The main difficulty I had with salam was the expectation that one had to do it, fueled by symbolism, which in my mind had gone too far. I disliked the hypocrisy of the action more than the action itself. For example, people from the higher classes would never salam those from the lower classes, even when younger in age. Salam had everything to do with status and little to do with true love or respect. It had nothing at all to do with religion. Tufel's my middle name. Tufel, you must salam anyone senior to you in age, even if by a single day. So why don't we all touch Abdul Latif's feet then? He's older than everyone, I would ask, referring to the barefooted and elderly security guard at our house in Dhaka. One evening in Sylhet, without much forethought or predetermination, I cracked. It was a dinner party at the house of the eldest daughter of the Modubazar branch of the family, a busy locality some 3 kilometers further into town than Hazaripur. Modubazar was where Dadu's sister lived, my grandmother's sister. Many prominent members of the family were present. On entry into the lobby, dripping with a few large raindrops caught from another monsoon downpour outside, I began by saying, Assalamu alaikum to each relative. I went around to the Murubbi, the elders, one by one, offering my hand to each of the men. The moment was significant to all for being so visible, and my abstinence from standard introductory custom was soon registered. As I continued around more and more relatives, the fact that I was in mutiny became evident. And for Amma and Abba, my mother and father, there approached the acute heat of imminent embarrassment. Whilst I'd questioned Salam for a while, they had never expected that it would come to this. The first accusing glances were cast at my parents, not at me. And without need for the words the look said, you two have failed to bring up your children properly in that heathen country where you've chosen to live, where young people do not understand how to respect their elders. You know what? Nobody does it anymore now. So I was the rebel. Yeah, I think that's the last.
How old was this tradition?
Oh, hundreds of years.
Millennia?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really
So
very rebellious.
yeah, very rebellious.
I can just imagine, can everyone imagine the like touching to the parents? Like we've all been there, haven't we? I mean, not quite so dramatically perhaps, but so you like change. Who has a question for our author? You can think about that for a moment. Oh, yes. Yep, we have some roving mics too. Do we have a question? Somebody with a question?
Okay, roving mic. Yeah, you ready to start? Can I just jump in?
Jump in, please.
Alistair from AIIA. Mohammed, thank you very much. Jaala too, thank you for coming. I've read some of the book, Mohammed, on a long haul flight to and from UK shortly. And a lot of it resonated with my own history. But a question I had, you talked at one point about being in a cricket match at Lord's when Pakistan were playing England. And I think you felt, having applauded the win by Pakistan, you were ostracized by those amongst you. I guess a few dual citizens such as myself might have felt conflicted last night with the Matildas. But my real question is, sport, how much do you think that is an equalizer between people and soft power, or is it still a point of division and feeling to be an outsider?
Yeah, thank you for asking the sporting question. And I think I'd say two things, Alistair. So one would be, I think sport is a huge equalizer. I mean, I was so sad that the Matildas didn't win last night, even though I'd normally support England, but I was really, really sad because I really wanted them to go through. The other thing I'd say would be that sport can in some ways be a bit of a weapon, if you like, of almost forcing people into sort of admitting who do you really support for, who do you really barrack for, and I think that affects people from time to time. So what Alistair's referring to is I was at I think it was 1992, I think. Pakistan was touring England. It was a test match at Lord's. It was the first time Pakistan won a test match at Lord's ever. Imran Khan was the captain, and you know, Mohsin Khan made a magnificent 200. And I was supporting England. I'm an England supporter, and against Pakistan, I'd always support England. But when they won the match, I really cheered for them because I just thought, this is brilliant. They've won their first match at Lord's. But I was sitting in a part of the crowd where pretty much everybody was sort of white male mainly, and I just got tutted by everybody. And that, of course, was pretty racist, right? Because there were all sorts of judgments flying around. And I think what's really interesting is there's something called the Tebbit test. Some of you might have heard of it. There was a minister in the Thatcher government called Norman Tebbit, and his Tebbit test was the way we find out what someone's real nationality is by asking them which cricket team they support. Now, that's divisive in my opinion, because I think that question comes from a framework of nation states, right? Which is that, you know, we all belong to a country. Whereas I don't think that actually applies, to be honest. I mean, that nation statehood, if you like, in my mind, is a post-colonial phenomenon. You know, the world was colonized by multiple grand powers, borders were drawn up, and now everyone's got a nationality. But if you go back 400 years, it wasn't quite so straightforward. And I think now in the multicultural world we live in, many of us have lived in multiple countries. We've got 3 or 4 citizenships. We've got partners, husbands, wives from different parts of the world. It's normal. So it's not that straightforward to sort of say, oh, I am this or I'm that. For some people it still is, but for many people it isn't. So Alice, a long-winded answer to your question, but I'd say that those 2 things.
Yes.
But I wanted the Matildas to win last night. I was sad they didn't, because of the greater purpose of their winning, right? You know, yeah. I'm happy England got through, but honestly, I wanted the Matildas to win last night. I couldn't say the same thing about the Ashes a couple of weeks ago, but that's
Hi, Mohammed, Andrew Weir from the City of Melbourne.
so nice to see you.
Hey.
Hey, Mohammed, 55% of residents of the City of Melbourne are born overseas. Are you still an outsider here?
Oh, great question.
No, you know what? I'm going to say my journey as an outsider, but I would like to thank everybody in this room, and I would like to thank everybody who's been involved with helping publish the book. You know, Andrea, the last few months, I think I've really made a big shift, because I feel as though that there is a way in which I'm an outsider, but there are many ways in which I feel way more at home. And that's not because everybody changed all of a sudden, because everyone's the same as they were 4 months ago. It's because I've changed, because I've softened a bit in my feeling ready to be here. You know, when I moved to Australia, I don't think I was emotionally ready to move to Australia at the time. Do you know what I mean? Like 5, 6 years ago, moved here for various family circumstances. But now I'm much more grateful for being here, and I'm very happy here. So Andrew, I'd say less of an outsider now, yeah. And it's really nice to see you.
Yes, another couple of questions.
Thank you. My name's Charles. Mohammed, the original print run of your book had the subtitle "My Journey as a Western Muslim." Now it reads "My Journey as an Outsider." It's interesting for a few reasons, one of which assumes Western Muslim and outsider are synonyms. Was there an anecdote as to how that change came about?
Yeah, I absolutely. It's a good spot, and I'm glad you asked the question. So it's a bit like products, right? You launch a product, and then version 2 is usually a bit better than version 1. I think version 1, Western Muslim, was because I felt my story was one as a Western Muslim, because I think a lot of the narrative was coming from the clashes and conflicts I felt over how to interpret and practice my faith, or indeed how my faith was looked at by others. So I think that's what drove the idea of Western Muslim. But I think by doing that, I possibly did the story a disservice. Why? Because I labeled it as, oh, this is a book for Western Muslims to read, right? Whereas I feel as though the experience of publishing it and now getting a chance to write a new introduction and preface and publish it here, I felt like the story is perhaps one for outsiders, Charles. So that was the thought. So I got the opportunity to update it in that way. I have to thank one of my 2 wonderful sons. Both my wonderful sons are here today, and it was in Italy when we were traveling last year, and he and one of my oldest sons said, "Dad, you should call it, you know, my journey is something else," and that was actually made me think, yeah, it's right.
I think there were parts of the story, because the story that you tell in some parts is really quite intimate, and so there are parts where I felt like an outsider looking in, particularly some of the reflections about your travels in the Middle East, and particularly some of your reflections about faith, but also religion, as you know, to make that sort of subtle but important distinction. And so I felt like I was looking at an experience that was really like quite foreign to me as well. And so that was something of a gift, I thought. I feel like I learned a lot as well and reflected a lot. Did we have some more hands? Well, there, everybody's going now. Very good.
I have an outsider. Do you feel an outsider in Bangladesh?
I grew up feeling an outsider in Bangladesh, less so now, probably because I care about it less, to be honest, right? But very much grew up feeling an outsider, both in Britain and in Bangladesh, because whenever we go to Bangladesh, we are the foreign kids. You know, we're the kids who perhaps don't know the local culture. So, for example, you know, Bengalis like eating fish. Now, fish usually has lots of bones, and Bengalis eat with the fingers, don't use cutlery. Fish comes with lots of bones, but typically I'd get the sort of, don't give him the fish, give him the chicken, because you won't be able to pick the fish bones. And I'm like, I know how to pick the fish bones. I've been eating fish since I was a kid, because we grew up as Bengalis at home in London. But it's that sort of, now it's done with good intention. And that's done with a caring side, right? But it left me feeling a bit on the outside.
Yeah. Oh, please.
Where do you feel the most like an outsider and why?
Okay, so thank you, Zaki.
Zaki's
My
question.
second wonderful song.
So the
Where do I
yes,
feel
the
like?
question
Yes.
was
Where do I feel most like an
an
outsider
outsider
and
and-
why?
yes, great question.
Wow, great question. So probably when this is a very difficult question to answer, very philosophical, because I think it's probably when I'm right in the heart of the family, probably, right? You know, if I'm in Dhaka, if I'm in London, right in the middle of a family gathering, in the core, because that's where perhaps the most traditional aspects of family happen. And I'm very much a family guy, but I'm not that traditional. So that's probably when I feel the most. That's probably why.
Equally fabulous answer. Okay, we might have just a couple more questions, and then we need to allow some time for people to, perhaps those who are a bit shy with the microphone, to say hello to our author, and we'll conclude the discussion in a few minutes. But please, yes, and then.
Thank you. I don't know whether I need a microphone or not. Oh, all right, okay. Because I thought I have a teacher's voice, so, all right. Researching on the identity myself, and I'm very much interested about talking about identity. So I feel being a woman from the being a migrant woman myself, we actually cross the borders every day in our life, like even without crossing border. In our mind. And so following Zaki's question, this is quite the opposite. I will say we all have intersectional identity, and it's like facades, and we use that facade depending on what situation we are in. So your first edition, I read that, and this one also. Do you think you have changed? You have acknowledged that you have taught it in a different way, but has it because you have changed, or what is the part of your identity you are most comfortable or you want people to notice about you? Because that is something every day I question myself. Does it make sense?
Thank you, Neera, for the question. I don't know if I'm going to do it justice, but I'd say that I've just become a lot more comfortable with who I am. And I think even, you know, writing the book, and you were mentioning, Jaala, about how you sometimes felt you're getting a look inside something. I mean, there was an element, quite a lot of elements to the writing, which is, you know, quite confessional, you know, being quite transparent and quite open about things. I feel as though I just gained a lot more confidence about just being comfortable in who I am. I don't feel I need to try anymore to try and fit in. You know, I don't think I do fit in everywhere, but I don't worry about that anymore. I think that's probably, maybe that's just age, maturity. I'm not quite sure, but that's probably how I try to answer your question.
Okay, I think we've got one. Okay, all right, two last ones, and then yes, yeah. Be loud.
Mohammed, interesting that you described your experiences of landing at Heathrow. Here you are writing, say, a third edition of the landing at Tullamarine. What would be your anecdote if you put landing in Tullamarine instead?
Tullamarine, well, it's all automated now, isn't it? So it's pretty straightforward. So, I mean, you didn't want a literal answer. You wanted the more thoughtful answer. I feel fine. I don't actually think about it anymore. So here's my answer. So I'm not conscious of coming back into Australia anymore. I just come in. So it goes back to the question Andrew asked over in the corner. So I just feel this is my home. So it doesn't go through my mind anymore. Actually, I just realized that having you having asked the question. Yeah. I think Dan wants to get it.
Okay.
Hi, thanks, Mohammed. Really interesting book, an important book. I think we both grew up in London in the 1970s, and the racism you describe in the start of the book is just brought me kind of back to what it was like then. And I think it's really important how you spelled that out. I was also reflecting on the fact that in the UK now there's a Asian Prime Minister, Asian First Minister of Scotland, Asian Home Secretary, Asian Mayor of London. But in that, it's not a linear process. And you had the Brexit vote, which basically, I remember waking up thinking 51% of the country is racist, and I didn't expect that. So Richard said at the beginning, but kind of, what do you feel about this book you've written and The Voice, and how Australia is coming to terms with people who are perhaps different?
Well, so I do see a parallel between The Voice and the Brexit vote, which is, the data or the interpretations which fuel people to make a decision. I felt that was the case in the Brexit vote. I fear that might be. I support The Voice, but I fear that might be an issue with the Voice vote when it happens. So I'm a little bit fearful about it, to be honest with you. I'm a little bit fearful. Yeah.
Okay, last question. I'm going to be in so much trouble for not following our grade run sheet.
My name is David Lamb, Institute member. As you were brought up in London, you would have been inculcated with a lot of stuff about royalty and respect and the traditions of Britain and so on. And then as you moved around the world, you would have come across a great deal of diffidence about the royal family and all of those traditions. Sorting out all that mess, how do you feel now?
I'd say a couple of quick anecdotes, David. Thank you for the question. I mean, one is that, I was like a massive fan of the Queen when I was like 12. I think when I was 11, it was her Silver Jubilee, 1977. I remember doing this really massive project about it. You would have read about it in the book, with massive pride, using royal blue ink and all that. And then, of course, you get some sort of racist comment the next day, and then you feel like, what is all this? So, and then, of course, you travel to India as a teenager with your English friends, and they walk around and they go, wow, the British did such a great job here building all these railways and roads. Of course, now I learned that India was 27% of world GDP 250 years ago. So, yeah, it's a bit of a learning process, isn't it? All the way through, I think. Bit of a learning process.
Yeah. So one last question.
Yeah.
85 countries you've worked in, is that right?
It's going to be 87 in 3 weeks' time, because I'm off to Seoul for the first time ever to do some work in South Korea. That'll be number 87.
Amazing. I've had the pleasure, as I know a number of people with us tonight have had working with you, so I'm sure that will be an important and successful endeavour. Are you now settled?
Yes.
How wonderful. Thank you everyone for joining us. The run sheet is not looking so flashed, but this is the bit where you get your book signed, have a snack, stay for a drink, have a further discussion with our wonderful author, Mohammad Chowdhury. I really want to recommend reading this book to you. It is, as I think Dan said, somebody said, this is an important book. It's an important book. It's also very generous and eloquent and fabulous. And everybody who reads it, I think, will be left with much to contemplate, but also there's some lovely insights into a life well lived. So thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you.
So I'd just like to say a few words to thank Mohammad and Jaala for an absolutely fascinating conversation. Mohammad is clearly an extraordinary man, and he's had extraordinary experiences. I've only worked with him for a short while, but I find him, and to echo Richard's words at the beginning, a man of grace, and whose utter calmness in the center of a maelstrom of activity is an inspiration to all. We're incredibly lucky to have him tonight, and you, Jaala, for bringing the best out of Mohammad. I hope everybody found it as interesting as I did. Please, please, please go and see the lovely Anna over there, who's going to sell you a book, including me. And also, if you've enjoyed this evening, and if you're not already a member of AIIA, please consider joining our institute. I can promise you, you will not regret it. There's QR codes, or if you'd rather speak to somebody, a real person, I can introduce Patricia standing at the back there, who will help negotiate you through the process with a piece of paper rather than an electronic form. So once again, Mohammad, Jaala, thank you so much.